All right, so let's just take a quick review of what you've done so far. So I'm going to turn off these layers. Notice I just grabbed the eyeball right above here and drug down. Cool little shortcut to hide. So we started out with your figure. We threw him into the street. Sounded horrible. Let's throw some fog on there. Added some zombie buddies. Threw on the bike. Adjusted the levels so we could darken up certain areas. And then merge them together. Now, what we're going to do with this is I'm going to take a look before we do this next step and kind of decide, do I like the intensity of the fog? Do I want to lower this down? Do I want to make it more? I'm going to leave it where it was. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to select this top layer that merged. We're going to come up here under filter and we're going to go to camera raw filter. Now, the camera raw filter, if you've used Lightroom before, should look pretty similar to something you've used before. This is where you can go in and make global, meaning adjustments to every single one of the layers by going in and playing around with the shadows, maybe adding to the shadows, pulling some highlights out, messing around with the contrast, adding a little bit more clarity to it. Notice what happens when I do this. I'm not having you do anything yet. I'm going to have you choose a preset here in a second. And see, adding in that little kind of crust that starts to happen. I can dehaze. I can add more color into it, take color out, desaturate to make it black and white, make it neon. So there's a whole bunch of different things that I can do in here, including curves and details and color grading and a ton of different stuff. I'm going to hit cancel. So I'm going to go back into, now let's actually do one. We're going to go into filter. I'm going to go to camera raw filter. Don't choose the first thing listed there because that's just showing you what your last settings were. So always leave that one alone and come down a little further. So I'm going to choose camera raw filter. And now what I want to do is I want to show you some of the pre-made ones that are here. So they have some filters that are set up. So if I come in and I click on this little option, this is showing me the before and after. If I go here under vintage and kind of look to see, it automatically is adjusting the colors and it's giving it a different look by applying a filter across the entire thing. If I choose modern, I can kind of move my mouse around here, kind of take a look and see which one I like best. Now, some of these presets are relatively new. There are some black and white ones. So you think black and white's all the same. It's really not. There's so much more you can do with it to add contrast and things. So those are some pretty cool automatic ones. Let's go ahead and do one of these artistics. With these artistics, what it's doing is it's putting in a different kind of color cast across the entire thing. But what it's doing is it's also helping to unify the colors that are in the separate images. So I'm looking between here, trying to decide if I like 4 or if I like 5 better. I like the blues in here, but I think I like the blues. I'm going to go ahead and choose artistic 4. If you want to choose artistic 5, that's fine because artistic 5's got some cool effect happening there too. So whichever one you choose, I'll be fine with. I'm going to go ahead and notice here, this is going to allow me to apply less of the effect or really ramp it up. I'm going to apply a little bit less. I did like some of the subtlety that was happening on 5, but I kind of like some of this bluish cast that's happening that goes nicely with the orange outside of here. You know, with blue and orange being complements, I kind of like that. All right, so I'm going to change that one to about 60% or so and click OK. All right, so now that we have this, I want to do some finishing touches on this by adding in some lighting around the bike because this is up front and it really is kind of distracting a little bit. And then we'll do a little bit of sharpening and kind of clean up the rest of this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to zoom in onto the bike lights. And I'm going to switch to my brush by pressing B. I'm going to lower the size down maybe about 400 pixels. And I'm going to have white as my brush color. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and I'm going to just paint a couple times. I'm going to lower the size of my brush. So I'm looking for like strong light coming out of the center and then just softer along the outside, just a slight little glow. All right, so that's kind of cheesy looking. I'm not really as excited by that because when I zoom out, it just looks like white paint. But there's a couple adjustments we can do using a hue and saturation. So what I'm going to do, oh crap, let's undo. I just realized I painted on the merge layer when I wanted to make a new layer. So up here, this is your history. If you can't find that, go to Window and go to History. I'll use this mistake as a way to show you how to fix this. So notice it remembers the last 25 things that I did in reverse order. So the newest ones at the bottom, oldest ones at the top. So I'm going to go back all the way up to when I first applied the camera raw filter. Excellent. That's like the way to undo. So now I want to make a new blank layer by clicking on the plus sign. I'm going to double click. I'm going to call that flare. And now I'm going to go brush this again. I'm going to make my brush a little bigger using the right square bracket. I'm going to tap twice, shrink it down, tap twice, tap twice, make it a little bit bigger, tap two more times, a little bit smaller. There we go. So I get a little bit of a glow. Now let's go ahead and change this to linear burn. It's not going to look any different initially, or sorry, linear light. It's going to do linear light. It's not going to look any different right now, but I'm going to change the color. So what I want to do is I want to click on an adjustment layer. I'm going to go to hue and saturation. And then what I want to do is I want to click this one option here, colorize. Now you'll notice this affected the entire layer. So I need to do a clipping mask. So in between the two layers, the hue and saturation and the flare layer, I'm going to press the option key and it switches to that little hook arrow. I'm going to click once. So now it's only going to affect this one layer. Now what I want to do is I want to play around with the different ways. There we go. See how that's starting to kind of pull in some color. I like that. All right, let's play around with this a little bit. I want to add a little bit more yellows. I don't want this quite as saturated. Maybe a little less. Yeah, let's try to look at about 40. That's looking kind of cool. Let's kind of bring this up. I want these to be a little bit more yellow. Do that. So let's do a 20, a 40, and a negative 22. So what that did is that gave it a little bit of a yellow orange-ish cast. And if you feel it's a little too strong, you can drop the opacity down a little bit. Zoom out and see what we've got. Yeah, so that gives me a little bit of a glow. The glow might be a little heavy still, so I might leave that one here, but then drop the opacity of the flare layer. Yeah, there we go. So I'm dropping the flare layer down about 75 or so. And then the hue and saturation, I'm leaving at 100%. Yeah, that starts to feel a little bit more natural here to have that yellow glow on there. And now let's go ahead and add another lens flare layer. So what I'm going to do is click here and let's go ahead and add. I'm going to call this flare 2. And what we're going to do on here is we're going to take another white brush. So that same brush that you just used. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode to overlay. And now I'm going to paint a little bit more on here and see if I can bring back just a little bit of that glow slightly. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Ooh, too much. Undo. Then I can drop and play around with that a little bit if I want to make it less intense or more intense. All right, so now that I have that, let's add one more adjustment. We're going to come down here and we're going to go to levels. And what we're going to do is we're going to darken the edges just a little bit more using this piece here. So we're going to do the same kind of selective thing we did back here where we made the zombies slightly lighter, but the rest of it was darker. So what we're going to do is go ahead and on this levels adjustment, let's go ahead and bring the midtones back down a little ways. I don't know, about there. So I got to about 64. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then I'm going to switch to my brush. That's way too heavy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, because what I want to do is I want to kind of keep this area darker and some of these areas darker and some of this area darker while lightening this area up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the brush B. I'm going to make sure it's on black. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. Let me zoom in just a little bit. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And I know I want to still be able to see the zombie. So what I'm doing is I'm just making my brush smaller as I go around. I know I want to see him still. I know I still want to see the zombie. I know I still kind of want to see some of the light that's already naturally shining down here. Since my brush is at 70%, it's not going full intensity. So I had to tap a couple times to have that work. I'm going to make my brush a little bigger. I want to lighten up the sky just a little bit. Tap around a couple more times around here. Let's zoom out just a little bit and see what's happening. So by doing this, it's darkening this area up. I kind of want to lighten this little corner. Give my bike a little more. So if you want to see kind of what I've got, this is this weird splotchy area, but what that's doing is it's having it where it's only affecting the area that I'm not painting on. So I can kind of come back to the levels if I really wanted to and kind of do a little more subtle adjustments. So I'm going to my layers and just change that to 68. All right, that's looking pretty good. And I think we're ready to do just one last thing. Command, Option, Shift, the letter E. That merges it. I'm going to call this Final Merge. And we are going to, on this final merge, we're going to do something to sharpen the image up a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit right here so I can see the zombies and I can see the figurine right in the center. I'm going to go to Filter. I'm going to go to Sharpen. And I'm going to go, actually, no, I'm going to do Filter, Other, and High Pass. Now, I need to lower this down a bit. I love doing this as my last thing because what this will do is this will sharpen the edges. Wherever there's black and white right next to each other, that particular area is going to get sharper. Now, first, you may look at this like, but it's gray. That's where the blending mode comes in. When you're dealing with blending modes, it's doing shades of gray. So either pure black, white, or shades of gray. When I change this to overlay, what it's going to do is it's going to ignore the gray and it's only going to focus on the black and the white. So it's only going to do things to the black and white areas that are showing up. So when I change this to overlay, now it's not noticeable at first, but go ahead and zoom in, especially on the zombie with the details that are there. Turn off this final merge layer and turn it back on. See what that did is it popped those highlights just a little bit and it darkened the black lines slightly. So what that does is it gives you just one little extra piece of sharpening that's subtle, but adds to some detail to this piece. And now, after all that work, you've taken these very basic pieces and you've created a composited scene that has a consistent color grade all the way across, more realistic lighting and shadows, a bit of fog, and you've had a lot of adjustment layers to be able to make that happen. Go ahead and save this one, and let's work on the next.